Thank you, and what a pleasure it is to be in Nashville again. I think the first time I spoke in Nashville, I began by singing a little country music, but I don't get a lot of requests to do that. I don't know why. It is very fitting to be in Nashville with this book because at a certain point, Elvis features in it. In fact, at one point, the hero of it, disguised as an Elvis Presley sex robot, finds himself locked into a packing case about to be shipped to Las Vegas, as one would be. And I found myself, also appropriately, I found myself doing a television show this morning called Word on Words, which I'm sure you know very well. And I was interviewed by J.T. Ellison in a jail. And it wasn't a jail that's still being exactly used. It's a sort of a show jail, as it were. It's a kind of training jail. But there we were, doing an episode in it, and that was fitting too. So this is The Heart Goes Last. It's an odd book. I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to be writing it. I had an editor that I worked with in the world of magazines, and magazines, as you know, glossy magazines used to publish a lot of fiction, and then they stopped doing that. And they also used to publish serious, longer-form investigative journalism, and a number of them stopped doing that too. So an online site called Byliner got set up that was going to do those two things. And my magazine editor, called Amy Lloyd, was working with them, and she said, "Margaret, why don't you try a longer piece of fiction on Byliner?" So, as I often do, I said, "Why not?" And you see the world that way. And so we did. We did a longer piece. Amy Tan had done one, and so I did one, and that went quite well. So I did 3 more episodes. It turned into a serial. But it was not a serialization of something that was finished and then cut up into pieces and put on the website. I was actually writing it as we went along. That was harder than you might think. My admiration for Charles Dickens increased. And by episode 4, right at the moment when the hero is in the too tight Elvis costume inside the packing crate, my Pages and Covers books editor caught wind of this. They caught wind of us. News traveled slowly from things online to the world of publishers. It's traveling a bit faster now, but in those days it traveled quite slowly, and they said, "Margaret, what are you doing? And you should turn this into a real book with covers and pages and do it as a novel." And that turned out to be harder than you might think, too, because as I was doing it as a serial, I did the things that you have to do with a serial, which is reminders. You have to put into, when we last saw Oliver Twist, he was picking pockets, on the streets of London, and meanwhile, like that. So I had to go and take all of those out because it's annoying in a novel when you're reading that. You just told us that. And I also took the embedded and implied backstory that was sort of woven in and put it up front and had to amplify it and really actually think about it, to tell you the truth. And then, of course, I had to finish it. I had to get Stan out of that packing case. Find out what happened then. So that is what I set about doing, and that is the novel that we now have, and I have now had the real-life experience of doing a serial online, and I'll try anything once. I'm not sure that I'm going to do this again, but it was very instructive. The other reason I was much more admiring of Charles Dickens after it was that he was writing page by page and just giving the pages to the printer as he finished them. He wasn't able to edit them or anything, and he was doing all of that with a quill pen. a quill pen made of a goose feather, and I have written with that very same quill pen. I've written with Charles Dickens's actual goose feather quill pen, which is in the Royal Society of Literature in London, and when they deem you worthy, one of their sort of arise, sir, so-and-so things that they do is that they give you a choice of two pens. Lord Byron's pen, which is oddly small and metallic, and it's apparently a gift from a lady. It had flowers on it. And this quill pen of Dickens, and you can choose either one. So I chose the Dickens, and I practiced first so I wouldn't make a big ink blot and blot out all of the famous names that were in that book. Very colonially embarrassing thing to have done. So he was scratching away with that thing and just handing the pages, and that's how Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist and some of his other things got written on the fly. It was a lot like daytime soaps in that if the audience liked a character and wrote him letters about that, he would make that character's part bigger. And if they felt he wasn't being nice to a character, they would, or nice enough, they would let him know that too. And in one case, the character suffers a remarkable personality change, sort of in mid-book. Nice parts of them that we didn't suspect at all suddenly appeared. And in one famous case, he was under enormous audience pressure not to kill off the angelic character, Little Nell. But he killed her off anyway. He couldn't help himself. And he describes writing the death of Little Nell with the tears pouring down his face. And news of this reached America by telegram, and the ship with the numbers containing the death of Little Nell were met by a huge crowd at the dock wearing black and weeping into their handkerchiefs. That was when literature really, had a kick. Now people just weep silently. So that's how I wrote it, and I'm going to read you a few little bits of it just to set the scene. But the first thing I will do is tell you about the epigraphs that are at the beginning of the book, which are like key signatures to a piece of music. The first one is quite high-toned, and it's from Ovid, and it's from the story of Pygmalion and Galatea, which, as I'm sure you will all remember, is the story of how the sculptor Pygmalion makes an ivory girl that is so beautiful that he falls in love with her and treats her as if she is alive, and the goddess of love takes pity on him and turns her into a real girl. It's like the Pinocchio story, only with sex. And the third epigraph is from Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, one of his comedies, and I've always found his comedies quite dark, and this one I think is darker than even some of the others. It contains two young couples who get confused in the woods and wake up to find themselves enamored of other people. A nightmare, of course, as anybody who ever went to a high school prom knows. So there's some of that in this book too, but the middle epigraph is from that wonderful new fairyland called the Internet, and it's from a blog called I Had Sex with Furniture, and it describes an adventurous young man who apparently some entrepreneurial person in this country thought it would be a good idea to build a sofa, not a sofa shaped like anyone, just a sofa, piece of living room furniture, with an aperture in it suitable for this purpose. And our hero, called Adam, said, "I did this so you don't have to." He doesn't give it a high score. So it's not in any way like a real person, he says. And that, too, is pertinent to some of the material in this book. So what is like a real person? What does that mean anymore in this day and age? There is a museum somewhere in the United States called the Museum of Failed Inventions. And I think that sofa is probably in it already because I don't think there was a lot of uptake. I don't think it had a large sale, partly because most sofas in this country are not bought by men. They're bought by women. Why didn't they figure that out? Well, you don't know. You can't follow their thinking. There's another thing in that museum called the Pet of the Month Club. You were supposed to send away, it was in the days of mail order, or we still are in the days of mail order. You sent away, you signed up for Pet of the Month, and they sent you the Pet of the Month in a box with air holes. Unfortunately, a lot of the Pets of the Month didn't travel very well through the postal system. Imagine the dismay of the child in question. So, that was a digression. The Heart Goes Last starts with a nice young married couple called Stan and Charmaine, who did quite well at first. They had a honeymoon. They had jobs. Each of them had a job. They were quite nice jobs. And they acquired a house and they had a mortgage. And then a 2008-like financial episode took place in their area, but with widespread repercussions. And as many people did then, and many people are still doing, they lost their jobs, they couldn't pay their mortgage, and they found themselves out with their possessions on the lawn and then living in their car. There's apparently a new film out called 99 Houses, in which the central character's job is to evict people from their homes. And the plot concerns him. He's not a nice man. And one of the people he evicts, who ends up working for him, I will rush off to see this film as soon as it comes to a theater or to a computer near me, because it's an ongoing motif. And a lot of people in big cities such as New York and London, England, young people, they're moving back in with their parents. How much of a nightmare is that? Because they can't afford to buy anything or rent anything. It's too expensive. Stan and Charmaine don't have parents, so that option is not open to them. So they're living in their car, and we begin with the voice of Charmaine. It's a double-hander. Stan and Charmaine take turns telling the story. Sleeping in the car is cramped. Being a third-hand Honda, it's no palace to begin with. If it was a van, they'd have more room, but fat chance of affording one of those, even back when they thought they had money. Stan says they're lucky to have any kind of a car at all, which is true, but their luckiness doesn't make the car any bigger. Charmaine feels that Stan ought to sleep in the back because he needs more space. It would only be fair, he's larger, but he has to be in the front in order to drive them away fast in an emergency. He doesn't trust Charmaine's ability to function under those circumstances. He says she'd be too busy screaming to drive. So Charmaine can have the more spacious back, though even so she has to curl up like a snail because she can't exactly stretch out. They keep the windows mostly closed because of the mosquitoes and the gangs and the solitary vandals. The solitaries don't usually have guns or knives. If they have those kinds of weapons, you have to get out of there triple fast, but they're more likely to be batshit crazy. And a crazy person with a piece of metal or a rock or even a high-heeled shoe can do a lot of damage. They'll think you're a demon or the undead or a vampire whore, and no kind of reasonable thing you might do to calm them down will cancel out that opinion. The best thing with crazy people, Grandma Wynne used to say, the only thing really, is to be somewhere else. With the windows shut, except for a crack at the top, the air gets dead and supersaturated with their own smells. There aren't many places where they can grab a shower or wash their clothes, and that makes Stan irritable. It makes Charmaine irritable too, but she tries her best to stamp on that feeling and look on the bright side, because what's the use of complaining? What's the use of anything, she often thinks. But what's the use of even thinking, what's the use? So instead she says, honey, let's just cheer up. Why, Stan might say. Give me one good fucking reason to cheer the fuck up. Or he might say, honey, just shut it, mimicking her light, positive tone, which is mean of him. He can lean to the mean when he's irritated, but he's a good man underneath. Most people are good underneath if they have a chance to show their goodness. Charmaine is determined to keep on believing that. A shower is a help for the showing of the goodness in a person, because as Grandma Wynne was in the habit of saying, cleanliness is next to godliness, and godliness means goodliness. That was among the other things she might say, such as, your mother didn't kill herself, that was just talk. Your daddy did the best he could, but he had a lot to put up with and it got too much. You should try hard to forget those other things, because a man's not accountable when he's had too much to drink. And then she would say, let's make popcorn. And they would make the popcorn, and Grandma Wynne would say, don't look out the window, sugar pie. You don't want to see what they're doing out there. It isn't nice. They yell because they want to. It's self-expression. Sit here by me. It all worked out for the best because look, here you are, and we're happy and safe now. That didn't last, though. The happiness, the safeness, the now. Stan. Stan twists in the front seat, trying to get comfortable. Not much fucking chance of that. So what can he do? Where can they turn? There's no safe place. There are no instructions. It's like he's being blown by a vicious but mindless wind, aimlessly round and round in circles. No way out. He feels so lonely, and sometimes having Charmaine with him makes him feel lonelier. He's let her down. He has a brother, true, but that would be a last resort. He and Connor had followed different paths, was the polite way of saying it. A drunken midnight fight with dickheads and douchebags and shit for brains freely exchanged would be the impolite way of saying it, and it was, in fact, the way Connor had chosen during their last encounter. To be accurate, Stan had chosen that way too, though he'd never had as foul a mouth as Con. In Stan's view, his view at that time, Connor was next door to a criminal. But in Con's view, Stan was a dupe of the system, an ass-kisser, a farce, and a coward. Balls of a tadpole. Where's Slippery Connor now? What's he doing? At least he won't have lost his job in the big financial crash business-wrecking meltdown that turned this part of the country into a rust bucket. You can't lose your job if you don't have one. Unlike Stan, he hasn't been expelled, cast out, condemned to a life of frantic grit in the eyes, rancid armpit wandering. Con always lived off what he could mooch or filch from others ever since he was a kid. Stan hasn't forgotten his Swiss Army knife that he'd saved up for, his transformer, his Nerf gun with the foam bullets. Magical disappearances all, with Con's younger brother head going shake, shake, shake from side to side. No way. Who, me? Stan wakes at night thinking for a moment that he's home in bed, or at least in a bed of some sort. He reaches for Charmaine, but she isn't there beside him, and he finds himself inside the stinking car, needing a piss but afraid to unlock the door because of the voices yammering toward him and the footsteps crunching on gravel or thudding on asphalt. And then Charmaine's terrified little whisper, Stan, we need to go. We need to go right now. As if he couldn't figure that out for himself. He keeps the key in the ignition always. Rev of motor, screech of tires, yelling and jeering, pounding of heart, and then what? More of the same in some other parking lot or side street somewhere else. It would be nice if he had a machine gun. Nothing any smaller would even come close. As it is, his only weapon is flight. He feels pursued by bad luck, as if bad luck is a feral dog lurking along behind him, following his scent, lying in wait around corners. So that is their situation. And then they see on the television in the bar where Charmaine works part-time, and which is their only source of income, they see on the television an advertisement for a project that you can apply to. And if you are accepted and get into this project, and we have a TV tour of what you get, you will have full employment for everyone in there. You will have a house that you can live in. You can have fluffy white towels. You will have a bed you can sleep in, You will have clean sheets with floral design upon them. And that is very, very, very appealing. So they do apply and they do get in. It's called the Positron Project. And at first it seems like a dream come true, or at least a much preferable alternative to living in your car. It is a for-profit timeshare prison scheme, but not a bad prison. Something had to be done with the actual criminals. They were too disruptive, so we don't quite know what happened to them, but they're not in evidence by the time Stan and Charmaine get there. So in this scheme, you spend 1 month living in the house that they've just seen on the television, and you spend the other month in the prison being a prisoner. And then you switch around again, you're back in the house, and the other couple that was living in the house when you were inside goes into the prison. They are your alternates. You're never actually supposed to meet them, because we wouldn't want any arguments about who didn't fold the sheets properly, would we? So then you have a job in the civilian town when you're not in there, and you have a job in the prison when you are in there. And on the surface at first, it seems hunky-dory. There are no disruptive influences. The decor, the ambience, and the music are 50s, because that is the decade where Americans self-identified as having been the happiest. You may not know that, but it appears to be true. So there's a lot of Doris Day music. Don't make that face. So they have an orientation, couple of days of orientation, and the head of this thing is a person called Ed, and I'm going to read you a bit from Ed's speech to them. So he's talking about the social meltdowns that have been taking place, and the lack of jobs and the results of that, and the ensuing crime wave that has resulted, and what shall be done. And Ed says, at first the solution was to build more prisons and cram more people into them, but that soon became prohibitively expensive. Not only that, it resulted in platoons of prison graduates with professional-grade criminal skills they were more than willing to exercise once they were back in the outside world. Even when the prisons were privatized, even when the prisoners were rented out as unpaid labor to international business interests, the cost-benefit charts did not improve because American slave workers couldn't outperform the slave workers in other countries. Competitiveness in the slave labor market was linked to the price of food, and Americans, who remain good-hearted despite everything, stray puppy rescuers every one, here Ed smiles indulgently, contemptuously, weren't ready to starve their prisoners to death while working them to the bone. No matter how much the prisoners were vilified by the politicians and the press as filthy dregs and toxic scum, still heaps of stick-legged corpses can't be hidden from view indefinitely. The odd, unexplained death, maybe. There's always been the odd, unexplained death, says Ed, shrugging, but not heaps. Some snoop would make a phone video. Such things can escape despite the best attempts to keep them under hatches, and who knows what sort of uproar, not to mention uprising, might result. Stan feels a small prickle at the back of his neck. That's his brother, Ed could be talking about. Or maybe not Con specifically, but he's pretty sure that if Ed got a close-up look at Con, he'd file him under toxic scum. It's fine for Stan to use names like that. It's within the family. And it's not that he approves of whatever it is Con is probably doing, but Ed opens his arms like a TV preacher. His voice gets louder. Then it occurred to the planners of Positron, he says, and this was brilliant, that if prisons were scaled out and handled rationally, they could be win-win viable economic units. So many jobs could be spawned by then. Construction jobs, maintenance jobs, cleaning jobs, guard jobs, hospital jobs, uniform sewing jobs, shoemaking jobs, jobs in agriculture, if there was a farm attached, an ever-flowing cornucopia of jobs. Medium-sized towns with large penitentiaries could maintain themselves, and the people inside such towns could live in middle-class comfort. And if every citizen were either a guard or a prisoner, the result would be full employment. Half would be prisoners, the other half would be engaged in the business of tending the prisoners in some way or other, or tending those who tended them. And since it was unrealistic to expect certified criminality from 50% of the population, the fair thing would be for everyone to take turns. 1 month in, 1 month out. Think of the savings, with every dwelling serving 2 sets of residents. It was timeshare taken to its logical conclusion. Hence the twin town of Consilience, Positron, of which they are now such an important part. Ed smiles the welcoming, open, inclusive smile of a born salesman. It all makes sense. Stan wants to ask about the profit margin and about whether this thing is a private venture. It has to be. Someone's got the lucrative infrastructure and supply contracts, walls don't build themselves, and the security systems are top grade from what he's been able to observe at the gateway. But he stops himself. This doesn't feel like the right moment to ask, because now a great big consilience has come up on the screen. Consilience equals cons plus resilience. Do time now. Buy time for our future. So now we can have questions and answers. You can ask questions. I will do the answers, maybe. Yes. How what?
How familiar are you?
I'm slightly familiar with the Corrections Corporation of America, and also I'm slightly familiar with the Cash for Kids scandal that happened in Tennessee, but I'm also familiar with the Australian prison colony quota-driven thing that went on in the 19th century, and that's pretty interesting too. So whenever you have a scheme like that that requires a quota of people that have to fill up the scheme for it to be profitable, you are in fact, you are motivated to make more prisoners to put in there. That's what happened with the Cash for Kids. There were people taking kickbacks. There were judges taking kickbacks for putting those kids in there. People, I think, are now rethinking this again. You know, we go through wash and spin cycles on this subject, and I just read a piece in where did I read it? I just read a piece somewhere or other about the fact that there's hot spots of incarceration, and those seem to be linked to certain DAs who like to put people in prison. So it is kind of nutty to have a country with 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the incarcerated people. And you have to adjust that number by saying that in some countries they don't bother putting people in prison, they just kill them. So there's you could put a somewhat positive spin on that. But on the other hand, and prisons have not always been with us in human history. In hunter-gatherer societies, they didn't have them because they didn't have architecture. So in order to have a prison system, you need to have somewhere to keep people. And if you're nomadic, you don't have that kind of facility, so you don't do that. What do you do? Well, there was a lot more interpersonal violence, so as I say, there's pluses and minuses. And in medieval times, dungeons were largely used for putting your political prisoners into. Ordinary criminals, you basically just cut body parts off them or killed them. There you go. Slavery in ancient times was the economic driver of the society, and there is a book by Barry Lord called Art and Energy, which talks about energy systems and the kinds of culture they produce. And one thing he says is that when we're in the middle of an energy system, people may deplore certain things about it, but nobody ever says that it should be abolished. So in that age of slavery, nobody wanted to be a slave, but nobody said, let's get rid of slavery, because the whole superstructure was being run on it. It died out finally because it became economically unviable in northern countries. It cost more to feed them than they could produce. We're weird people. So 19th century was an age of prison reform. People changed the names of them to things like penitentiaries and reformatories in that age. And I think we're entering another age of rethinking all of this, because you have to ask yourself what it's for, especially when it gets too expensive, as it has recently done in California. They've had to scale back on their ideas about how many people they can keep supporting in this way on the public dollar. A lot of things are driven by that. When you come right down to it, can we afford it? Isn't there some other way of thinking about this that would produce better results, that is less crime, and be less expensive? That might be called education and job creation, just for starters. Yes?
I got out of it like somebody was at a workplace and they was running across each other and having a conversation about maybe environment, social mainstream media, politics. I know you mentioned something like Earthwave or like radio or something, but I was getting at these. You move on to like point slavery, like something about like it's a slave or you see the slavery like. But that's all like slavery was like in 1492. His mom and dad had hired somebody to kill him, so they started the United States American Constitution, the United States Courtesy, and Declaration of Independence of we people. And like if you have somebody else, like now there's a new planet like for us, planet keep for people to be 60% on the Earth. What are you talking about when it's 29 million years?
So is there a question? So,
the first one was like, my kindergarten teacher, Ms. Taylor, passed line 24 elementary. If she was reading a book and I walked into the room and I met at the grocery store, and the Henry that she knew then, the Henry that she taught from A to Z, to like the Henry of today now, I'm just a ninth grader right now. Like, politically, where do I stand with her? Because like, if I tell you, like, I know West African language called Nick Fonte, West African Fonte, and Cherokee Indian. What do you think, good news or bad news, comes from like what's been happening like for us? Like your book coming up and like.
good news or bad news? About the new. The new planet that they've discovered. Well, I think that new planet is pretty far away. So until people get some much more improved way of space transportation. I mean, my feeling about aliens in outer space has always been that if they're smart enough to get here, they're way smarter than us. And we should probably not really wish for that, because they would probably think we were some kind of, dog or cat or something. We would be so far beneath their level of development. So I say, don't tell them we're here. Shh, don't tell. Yeah, I've read my sci-fi. Keep far away. I don't know why we keep sending space probes out there. It's, I don't know. Yeah, it's...
So dishwasher attachment officer. I mean, that's my occupation, dishwasher attachment officer.
You never know.
Speaking of reading your sci-fi, do you consider yourself, or do you mind being called a writer of science fiction?
It depends how people are defining it. It's like all of these things. So you have to ask them what they mean by that, and then we can talk about it. Because it's like, okay, what do you mean by feminist? What do you mean by ecologist? What do you mean by Christian, as far as that goes? Do you mean the Pope, or do you mean somebody doing snake dances, or just what do you have in mind? So if you mean by science fiction other planets, spaceships, aliens, and that kind of thing, I don't write that. If you mean by sci-fi stories that take place in the future, well, there's a lot of different ones of those. Some of them are fantasy. Some of them are what I would prefer to call speculative fiction, which means could happen. Most of it has happened. We could do it with just a slight tweak here and there. So that third kind is the kind I write. Some people like to use science fiction as a great big banner that takes in everything. I think that's somewhat misleading, because what people then expect are the spaceships, the aliens, and other planets in a galaxy far, far away and in another time. And if they open the book and find out it's not in there, they're going to be disappointed. So that's how it is. I'm quite happy to be called anything, as long as the people will say what they mean by it, and then we can talk about whether I am that thing or not. If feminist means pushing all men off a cliff, no, I'm not. It's just, that would be unfortunate. If it means women are human beings, I'm putting my hand up for that. And then we can talk about what we mean by human beings, right? So there was one, yes, thank you.
Once you create your analogous societies, how do you figure out what characters you want to put in?
Okay, once I create my analogous societies, how do I figure out what characters I want to put in them? It's backwards. So usually I just start with a situation. So it's not world building first and then putting people in. So it's not like Second Life. Okay, or a lot of video games in which you build the world and then you put these people running around inside it. Do you know that you can get a video game of The Great Gatsby? It's sort of like Super Mario, only with Gatsby champagne bottles and things like that. It's quite funny. There are a lot of funny video games around. Okay, so it's people, because all novels really are about people, even if they're Watership Down and say they're about rabbits, or even if they're about hobbits. Essentially it's people. So it's people in a situation, and then it's like going into a space with some things in it that you don't quite know what they are, and the process of writing the book is finding that out. What's going on with these people, and how are they then reacting to the situation that they find themselves in. And I think a lot of the reason that we read dystopias and future fictions is we're wondering how we ourselves would react if we found ourselves in that kind of situation. And we're also wondering, if all the lights went out, how prepared are we? I think the closer you are to a rural background, the more prepared you're going to be. Because when the lights go out, you're not going back 10 years, you're going back about 200 years, technologically. Don't know whether you followed the Hurricane Sandy in New York City when the lights went out in the lower part. People were running. They were running uphill away from the water with their cell phones, looking for a charge. You know, they weren't even looking for food. They were looking to plug their phones in. Yeah, we are very, very dependent on electricity right now. And that's one of the questions that always comes up in the zombie apocalypse or any other kind of apocalypse is, where are we going to get the energy? And how would we react? One of my friends has invented a game called the Zombies Run game, which is an exercise aid app that you download onto your phone. You put the earbuds in your ears, and it gives you something like an old-fashioned radio serial as you run along, because running is pretty boring. You know, exercise is boring. Let's face it, it's boring. Even with music, it's boring. But this gives you something pretty involving. And you're running along, and you're runner number 5. You've been sent out by your beleaguered humans to pick up the water bottles, the Band-Aids, and other things that you might need. And you pick them up, and you have a dispatcher who's saying, runner number 5, you're in the clear, pick up the water bottle, etc. And then the dispatcher tells you stories of other runners number 5 who have come to a bad end. And you're running along. And then she says, oh, runner number 5, I've made a terrible mistake. I don't know what happened. There's zombies all around you. Run! And then you have to run faster. And it's measuring your speed and your heart rate and your blood pressure so you don't actually kill yourself. And it comes in serialized installments, and it's been really pretty popular. So part of it is, how would I do? Runner number 5, how are you going to do? I'm in one of the episodes. I'm not a runner. I'm in the CN Tower in Canada because this is a British person, and Britain has lost touch with Canada for months and months, but now they've reestablished contact through me, and I'm telling them what has happened to Canada. And I tell them some sad news. I tell them, for instance, the entire Canadian government has been zombified. True. But worse, much worse, the entire NHL hockey league gone. Zombies on skates. It doesn't work. So sorry, I'm getting quite old, and at this age, one fools around a lot. So over here, yes.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I wanted to ask about going back to prisons, even though that's much less entertaining than zombies.
Orange is the New Black has been a huge hit. The only problem with it, it makes it sound kind of jolly, like summer camp or something.
Right. Well, actually, that's sort of what I was wanting to ask you about. You talk a lot about the American case for prisons, and I'm wondering how much you think race plays a role.
A big role. So, that's not news to anybody, I wouldn't think. And in Canada, it's First Nations.
Right.
So disproportionate number of people.
I guess I'm less curious about whether you confirm what seems patently obvious, but whether, how do you feel that works? I mean, because your characters, they're white, aren't they?
Yeah, but as I said, they did something to the people who were there before they vanished. Yeah, you can't have any actual criminal people in there. It would be too disruptive. So this is a new. It's a different. Actually, it's sort of like a gated community, except with a very sinister undertone. Like that. Where did the other ones go? You'll find out.
Yes, they were saying science fiction, but there was a writer, Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune years ago when I was underclassmen, but he was brilliant. He said, it's not science fiction, it's possibly fact and the futurist. Did you have the opportunity to know when his watch California?
No, yeah, the subject is Dune and the author of Dune, and did I ever know him? No, I didn't know him. I did know Ray Bradbury a bit, and I wrote the eulogy for him in the Guardian newspaper. So that whole generation, of course, you can, when I'm writing a novel, I make charts for my characters. How old were they when? And a lot of that classic sci-fi was appearing in the 50s when I was a teenager, so of course I was reading it. Dune is a bit later. But Bradbury, John Wyndham, Orwell, of course, and Huxley was part of that, although he was a bit earlier. And a number of those magazines were still around at that time, sci-fi magazines, although the classic period for them was probably the 30s. So didn't know him. Fact in the future, that's always problematic to say anything like that because it's very hard to really, really predict the future. There are too many variables. There isn't any just one, the future. There are an infinite number of possible futures, and we're going to get one of them, but we don't know which one. Oh, thank you. Yes.
I'm curious, a lot of the conversation about how the publishing industry has changed with the influx of technology has been really negative, kind of putting it as like the good old days are gone. So I'm curious, as someone who has published over a large amount of time and gotten to see some of that change, what are you excited about the possibilities of that kind of things to publishing going on?
Okay, the question is about the publishing industry and the moaning and groaning that takes place about it. And there is some, everything. There's going to be pluses, there's going to be minuses, there's going to be things you hadn't thought of. But being as old as I am, and being from that other place. So when I started writing, there actually wasn't much of a publishing industry in Canada, and it was hard to publish in Canada as a Canadian, and people of the generation just before mine went somewhere else. They went to London, they went to France, they went to New York, they went to Los Angeles. There's a lot of Canadians in the film business there because there wasn't the opportunity in Canada. We had some branch plant publishers. They imported books mostly, but to publish a book as a Canadian about Canada, that was very hard. There had been some, Anne of Green Gables, sort of kids lit, but it just wasn't, it was a hard thing to do. So our response to that partly was to start our own publishing companies. And I see a lot of invention, a lot of inventiveness going on amongst young people right at this moment. So something like the internet comes along, something like digital tech comes along, people are going to play with that. They're going to take it this way and that way and consider what they can do with it. And there are always things that work and things that don't work. There's a lot of invention, some of them don't work. It's like the Burgess shales, a lot of different life forms, and only a few of them made it through. So online, there's a lot of activity going on. People say things like young people don't read. They're wrong. Young people are reading. They're reading a lot online. And I know the Wattpad kids, for instance. I call them kids because they're younger than me, quite a lot younger than me. And it's a story-sharing site. There's also fan fiction. There's a lot of that going on. In my day, the good old days, the only place you could publish it if you were a teenage person, unless you made your own sort of hand-lettered publications, the only place you could actually publish as a high school student was the yearbook. And who would read it? It would be your teachers, your parents, and your peer group. Were you going to put your steamy vampire story into it? No, you were not. There are just all kinds of reasons I can think of. So you didn't want to be laughed at by your peer group or chastised by your elders, so it was my summer vacation, and pretty boring. You got marks basically for having grammar, and That's it. So now kids are writing on their phones, they're posting, they're using pseudonyms, and they're getting feedback. They're actually acquiring audiences. And we know that when kids have an audience, a readership that's responding to them, they up their game. So it's actually quite encouraging to them to be able to do that. And it's especially encouraging for ones that live in developing countries. They might not have a library, they might not have a bookstore, they might not have a school, they might not be able to afford, even purchasing ebooks. That would be too expensive for them. But a number of these sites are free, and you can do it on your phone. Wattpad's the one I know best, and I think it's probably the biggest, but there are some others as well, and there are some for more serious, older writers too. So that's a positive. And the other thing that is happening a lot now that never used to happen, the outburst of the creative writing chorus. Once upon a time there may be one of them or none of them. And this has now become really quite a widespread thing. Good side, bad side, stupid side you didn't think of. All of these things are happening. So the publishing industry itself, after having some shocks, a series of shocks, that would be the arrival of ebooks, the challenge of Amazon, and the financial meltdown in 2008, it seems to have stabilized. And the questioning as to whether the paper book would just immediately vanish, that's gone away. The paper book has in fact made a comeback. There are neurological reasons for that. It's easy to read short things on a screen. It's hard to read War and Peace. It's just hard. You want a book for that. So this is all in play, and it's fascinating to watch. I think for a young person, there's a lot of opportunity. There's also a lot of frustration because there's a lot of young people writing. I was lucky in a way because writing was thought of as just not anywhere in sight, as something you might do with your life. And that had two kinds of luck. First of all, hardly anybody else was doing it. But second, I was never told I couldn't do it because I was a girl. In my vicinity, they didn't say, you can't do that because you're a girl. They said, what? You want to do what? No, you can't do that. So I always knew I would have to have some kind of another job, and I did have some kind of another job, number of different ones for years. That's the way it was then. I think some people now think that they should immediately write a bestseller and that will make them millions of dollars and that they will just kind of hop into that. We never thought that. In fact, I was so pragmatic that as a teenager I went and got copies of Writer's Market to see what kind of writing actually got paid. And the kind of writing that got paid as the most in magazines then was true romance stories. So the kind with the cover on, with the girl in the foreground, tear coming out, in the background a different girl, a nice young man. Boo-hoo, she stole my boyfriend. Like that. And you got paid the most for those. So I actually tried to write them. I thought I could write those in the daytime and make this what seemed to me like a lot of money. And then I could write my deathless masterpieces in the evenings. But I was no good at it. It takes a knack. I could think up the plots, no problem. I couldn't do the vocabulary. I couldn't do the asterisks, which were required in those days. This is before Lady Chatterley's Lover was permitted to be published. So it was like they sat on the sofa. The sofas were involved. He takes her in her arms, and then we were one. ... Like that. I couldn't do that part. I laughed too much. Yes.
Thank you for your talk and for reading to us. And I see, and it's probably pretty
pretty obvious that a lot of the books that you've written have been cautionary tales.
Some of them have. Actually, by head count, most of them haven't.
Okay.
Unless the cautionary tale is look out for people.
So I guess I was wondering, like, how much motivation do you have to write cautionary tales, and if you are writing them, where do you see yourself bleeding over into any type of advocacy?
Okay, yeah.
Or do you pretty much steer clear of that?
It's impossible for me to steer clear of it for the simple reason that I'm always being asked to do it. And the reason I'm always being asked to do it is that I don't have a job. And think about that for 1 second. So people like me who don't have a job, but who are, a little bit known, are always being asked to do it because other people can't. But I consider it, in a way, a couple of steps over from what I write, although, of course, everything you do is joined at the hip. You can't get away from that. I think each one of those things that I've done, and it would be The Handmaid's Tale, the Mad Adam trilogy, and this book, they've all been linked to real-life concerns that I have had. But that doesn't mean that I'm bad at joining groups. I'm just not good at it. I think I was a brownie once, and that was kind of it for me. I don't think I've really been much of a... I'm not very good at doing what other people tell me. Sorry about that. Writers generally aren't. And that is why you should never say, writers should, and then fill in the blank, because they won't. They'll do what they feel drawn to do, and then you can have your own opinions about that, but dictating to them ahead of time, unless you're a totalitarianism, it's not on. So, yes, I've been most active recently in the conservation area with an organization called BirdLife International. But I was also in the early 70s, I was one of the founders of the Writers Union of Canada because we didn't have agents at that time in Canada. So it was, at that time, advocating for writers. So you form groups to do that. You help form the group, and then hopefully you go away and other people run it. And it was the same with the Canadian Pen, which I also co-founded in the early 80s in Canada, and I didn't have any money. I raised the money to do it by writing a book called the Can-Lit Food Book, which was bits about food out of people's novels and poems. Usually it was awful food, but, that's what people put in books. And then I got the writers to give me recipes, and I put them at the back. And I illustrated it myself. And I got an agent to auction it to a publisher and not take a fee. So that gave us enough money so we could get it going. The recipes are quite funny because a number of these writers couldn't cook. So I think Michael Ondaatje's recipe was grapefruit. Take the grapefruit, you cut it in half, put it on a plate. Cut out the sections. If you want to, you can put a maraschino cherry on top. Like that. Another one gave us a recipe for toast. And another one, he did cook things, but he was also a big bush guy, out in the woods. It was for a recipe in which you had a frozen fish and a chainsaw, and and some aluminum foil, never mind. Good, though. Okay, maybe 2 more questions. There's one right there, black and white.
I'm wondering if you have noticed a trend in readership when it comes to the way literature makes society as a whole feel. I know with the whole Go Set a Watchman, and people were kind of upset with the plot line of that. Do you think that as a society we are trying to get literature to make us feel better? And do we want, I'm sorry, I'm not expressing.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Keep going.
Literature is supposed to shake you up. So do you...
Well, there is no supposed in literature. So the question is, trends in literature, do you think that we are trying to find literature that will soothe us and make us feel better, or are we trying to, or are we going for edgier stuff that is going to shake us up? Well, the thing about readers is they come in all shapes and sizes and preferences. And some of them are going to go for books that do make them feel better, and they will go for certain kinds of genre fiction because they know what to expect. They don't want any horrible surprises. And other people, when they're feeling adventurous, will go for edgier books. But there's no rule that says that the same person is not going to read both, depending on what they feel like that day. I have an extremely wide range of what I will read, and it is according to what I feel up to and what's interesting me at that time. And I think a lot of people who read a lot of books are like that. There are some people who will just read one kind of book because they don't want any surprises. They want to know that the embrace will take place on page 85 and the proposal, and that it will end with that Mr. Darcy will marry Elizabeth at the end. And that is comforting to them. So there's really, the thing about words being written down on a page is they're of all kinds, just as the kinds of stories that get told in a society are of all kinds. There isn't any has to, there isn't any should. Okay, yeah? I have written children's books, but for very small children, so not young adult books. The interesting thing about young adult books is that people read up, by which I mean that 12-year-olds will read books that say 15, suitable for 15-year-olds. And quite frequently, adults will read young adult books, if they're good, and derive pleasure from them. I think a lot of the readers of Harry Potter ended up being people in their 20s. And they followed the series up. So maybe one more, somebody that I haven't had, some section that I haven't looked at before, way over there.
I was taking a look at your book about debt payback, where you talk about the way that debt in our society fulfills some of the symbolic functions of sin in previous times. And as you were reading from your new novel, I couldn't help thinking about some of the striking resonances in the themes, and I wondered if you would talk at all about how debt appears in this book, or...
Okay, so I wrote a book several years ago that was published in 2008 in October, just as everything fell apart, and it was called Debt. It was called Payback, Debt and the Shadow Side of Wealth. And it was a lecture series that people have been trying to get me to do for years and years and years. And I'd finally agreed to do it. And you have to tell them 2 years ahead of time what you're going to write on, because you have to write the book, then you have to condense the chapters, which are 5 in number, and give one of those as a lecture in each of 5 Canadian cities. And then those get condensed a little bit more, and they were a radio program. So it's a major undertaking, which is why I didn't take it on for years and years and years. I was washing my hair. But I finally said I would do it through a chain of circumstances too tedious to relate. And it was to be published in 2009, but then the person who was going to publish in 2008 couldn't do it in time. So they said, please, 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 please do yours in 2008. So it appeared right when the financial meltdown happened and everybody thought I had a crystal ball, but I didn't. I'd just been reading ads in the subway, which said, let us help you out of this debt. I thought, boy, if there's that many ads, it's got to be a problem. But my interest was really literary. Having been a Victorianist, it's a major theme in the 19th century novel. Money is at the bottom of just about every one of those plots. And with every one of those characters in those books, we know what layer of society they are from. We know where their money is coming from. We know when it becomes a problem. Dickens is the prime example, but it's in every one of those other classics of Victorian literature, including Madame Bovary and including Vanity Fair and including Middlemarch. Just name one, it'll be there, even Cranford. It was the age of early capitalism, and people couldn't figure out boom and bust cycles and why suddenly one group of people had lots of money, where did they get it, and then somebody would lose all their money, how did that happen? So it was a big motif, no social safety net. What was the question? Oh yes, how does it fit in? So my book, when I told the runners of the lecture series and the publishers what I was going to write about, they almost had a fit because they thought it was going to be a book on economics, which it isn't. It's a book about how human beings owe one another. What is owed, who is it owed to, how does it get paid, and what is it? And one of the chapters is religious in nature because it's a big motif in religions. Usually the payback comes when you've overspent on the misbehavior side, and then you have to pay it off in the afterlife. And that goes way back to the ancient Egyptians, and certainly continues on through particularly the Christians. So, and the Muslims, as far as that goes. So then I look at it as a motif in novels, and then I look at what happens when you don't pay up, and that gets us into debtors' prisons. That was a stupid idea. You owe somebody some money, so they put you in jail, so you can't have a job, so you can't pay it. I mean, who thought that? Who thought of that? It's very odd. And then I talk about balances. So balance in nature, which is also runs on the debt principle. If you overdraw the account, things don't grow anymore. So the question is, how is that linked to other stuff that I write? I don't know. It's an interest of mine. How do we calculate these things? How do we think of them? How do we conceptualize them, and what sort of effect does that have on people in the society? What sort of effect does this sort of model have? What sort of effect does that sort of model have in all areas of life, including biology? Like that. Okay, maybe one more, because that was kind of a really simple question to which I'm going to give a really simple answer. How about you?
With all your talk of smelly bones and manufactured chickens, are you a vegetarian?
Am I a vegetarian? Not quite, but close. We have a vegetarian daughter. On the other hand, I spend quite a lot of time in the Arctic. So in the Arctic, there are no vegetable gardens. And you are eating animals and the odd piece of seaweed. You're eating your animals raw because that's where you get your vitamin C. So all of these things are really linked to, for me, they're linked to geography. Where are you living? How are you getting your food? What is your energy source? How are you making a living? And that's true for every biological creature on the planet. So I can see both sides. And as for lab meat, it's got certain pluses. No animal need be harmed. Number one. Number two, nothing burps. So no methane. And no rainforests need be leveled. So you got to think of think of things from all angles, do you not? So there we are. Thank you.